Hello, welcome to our hour-long Easter Gardener's World. This is the best moment in the year to get anything done in the garden. And I shall be transforming mine here at Longmeadow with some roses, amongst other things.
Carol shows us how to find inspiration in the hedgerows.
Primroses, ditchwort, sorrel, arums, ferns, ivy, pignut. I mean, the list is almost endless.
Rachel travels to Cumbria to discover the art of gardening in extreme conditions.
And that's why these fences are around here as windbreaks, which is only temporary. They've only been in 10 years.
At the Eden Project, the gardeners have gone to extraordinary heights to get their tropical plants into shape.
It's a very important, serious piece of equipment. It just happens to be quite enjoyable as well.
And as well as planting roses, I'll be sowing some carrots and revealing my recipe for perfect compost.
Okay, that's strong. There we go. I've never planted climbers against this wall. It's always been a backdrop to the border, so this is a good opportunity. And if you're planting up a wall for the first time, the first thing to take into account is its aspect. And then you can select your plants that will suit the situation rather than trying to place plants that you like and get them to fit, because they've got to be happy. They've got to feel at home. Now this is east facing, so any aspect means you put your back to the wall, look out, and that's the direction that it's going to be the dominant factor in what influences the plants. Now, east-facing wall is cold. It's never in full sun except for a few hours around about breakfast time, and it's never in full shade. So, for example, camellias would be no good here at all because they'd be cold, they get morning sunshine, and that's when the blooms get damaged. Wisteria would be wasted on this wall because it needs nice baking sun to flower properly. But honeysuckle, completely happy against it. Almost all clematis would love it on here, and a lot of roses. And it's roses that I'm going for because this is pretty much a rosy garden. And also the thought of having roses growing along this wall, a treat. I'm not going to overlook it. And the first one I'm going to plant is this one, Madame Le Gras de Saint-Germain.
This will work well on my wall. And because it's virtually thornless and has a fabulous scent, it would be ideal next to a path or a seat.
This is bare root, so it's been kept in a bucket of water. And if you're planting any bare root plants, don't expose it to the air till the very last minute. Always keep them either covered with damp cloth or in a bucket. And as with any climber, I'm going to plant it well away from the wall. There's a temptation to get it snuck in there so it will climb up. Don't. Put it out at least a couple of feet. I want it away from the yard, so about here. Now there is an acanthus growing there, so I will remove that. And that can be moved to somewhere else. It's got a nice root on that, so I'll put that to one side. Okay. And then, now that's what I need to remove. If you see that in the garden anywhere, it's bindweed. If I get that in the roots of the rose, that's a disaster, because I'll never get it out. Take any amount of time and trouble to remove it. I don't want it. Now what I'm doing with this hole is essentially loosening the soil. Just make sure that there's a nice easy root run. Loosen the sides of the hole as well. So what I have in there is nice friable soil. I'm going to add a little bit of compost, but not too much. And the reason for that is that I don't want to create too snug a home for the plant. If you add lots of manure or compost to a planting hole, the plant never wants to leave. This is just going to be a kickstart for them. Literally that much will go in the bottom of the hole. Just sprinkle that in and mix it in. And actually the microbacterial activity will be as important as anything else. But what I am going to add is this. And this is mycorrhizae, which is a fungus. it enables the plant to interact with the bacteria in the soil. If I can take the lid off. Comes in a powder like that, and it's particularly good for roses or any woody plant because they can be slow to establish their own mycorrhizal relationship. So it speeds up a natural process by up to 2 or 3 years. So we just sprinkle that on to the soil, and we've got our bare root plant, lovely root system. And the advantage of bare root plants is that you can see how healthy they are, and they tend to be much cheaper. So if you can get them, a distinct bargain. I want to plant this, it's going back against the wall, so probably in that orientation. And I want to plant that so that the graft is just below the surface, which is about there. Push that in, and the next stage is just to backfill enough to hold it in position, because then I'm going to fill the hole with a bucket of water. And what this means is that as the roots grow, they will be going into damp soil. It's been terribly dry of late. And just let that absorb right down and then backfill the soil. But I'm going to go and have a cup of tea. I'm firming but not stamping because it's wet, so it's like a bog. And then I'm going to water it again. Right, we'll let that gradually soak in. When it's completely absorbed, bring the soil back so it's level, and then, and this is important, put a really generous mulch of compost all around the plant. It'll suppress weeds, it'll keep the moisture in, as well as enriching the quality of the soil. Right, that's Madame Legrand planted. Now she is a climber, a small climbing rose. What I'm going to plant here, Felicity perpetuae, is a rambler.
If you want a rambler that will flourish in shade, or one that will scramble into a tree, then Felicity perpetuae is a good choice.
And the difference between ramblers and climbers is not that great, and certainly not one to get worried about, technically. But ramblers more or less always have a great froth of small flowers that only produced once, and they tend to have very long, vigorous shoots. Climbers come in all shapes and sizes. You can get climbers with great big flowers, you can have climbers with small flowers, you can have them that are suited for many more different positions. So on the whole, a climber is going to be more adaptable. But where a rambler works, it works in a way that no climber can match. So if you want that exuberant froth of flower in midsummer, then ramblers are perfect.
But whether rambler or climber, the planting technique is the same. The last rose I'm planting is Weikenblau. This is another good choice to grow over an arch or alongside a path, because, like Madame Legrand, it is virtually thornless and is delicately fragrant.
Now that doesn't look much. A few little green twigs sticking out the ground. These have been pruned hard before they left the nursery, which is a good thing, because all the new growth will be from the base of the plant and we'll get nice vigorous new growth. But when you buy ramblers or climbers from a garden centre, very likely they'll be as much as 4 or 5 foot tall and ready to lean against the wall. That's fine. You can cut them back, which is probably the best horticultural advice because you'll get the new growth, but it takes a very hard heart to do that. We want to see flowers and we want to see them as soon as possible. Now these roses are all exotic. They've come from all over the world, they've been highly bred. But one of my favourite roses of all is the simple dog rose that you get in the hedgerow. Unadorned and as lovely as anything you can put in the garden. And it's to the hedgerows around her own garden that Carol has been looking for inspiration.
At this time of year, my garden changes by the hour. I just love this little corner better than anywhere in the garden at this moment. It's full of newness and freshness. It's springtime personified. And I love the way everything feels so very new. And sometimes you see a bud opening, a flower emerging, and you know that you're the very first person to see that in all its pristine glory. Spring has brought an exciting display at Glebe Cottage, but also something rarer, a new space to plant. I've dug up an old unused path and made a new bed. Do you know, whatever your garden size or shape, whether it's in the town or the country, all of us have boundaries to our garden. We have edges. They're either made by fences or walls or hedgerow. What can you grow there? I mean, 1 minute it's hot beating sun, the next they plunged into dense shade. And the water's so uneven, sometimes it can be a deluge, and sometimes the place is as dry as a bone. Well, the edge of this border is made up with this wattle fence, and behind it, my native hedge, which I proudly planted just a few years ago. It's getting established, but this countryside all around us, all the fields are surrounded by hedges. In fact, North Devon's famous for them. So I'm off to have a look at what's growing at their feet, because the plants that thrive in this unique and challenging environment will give a good indication of the sort of plants that will flourish in my new bed. For 1,000 years or so, the people of these islands have been enclosing their land by using hedgerows. Well, as these hedges have grown and developed, this whole wondrous array of different plants have moved in and evolved with the hedgerow, exploiting the conditions there. They live in really close harmony with one another. Things like primroses, stitchwort, sorrel, arums, ferns, ivy, pignut. I mean, the list is almost endless. And they're the plants that give us a lot of inspiration about the kind of things that we can use in similar situations in our own gardens. What's evolved here is a community of plants that intermingle and grow with each other, and that's what I want to create in my border. I'll be using a combination of native plants and some of their cultivated cousins. All plants that can cope with sun and shade and handle dry summers and wet winters. Above all, plants that don't need mollycoddling. They'll be happy to just get on and grow, whatever the conditions. This is the sweet shop moment. I've gathered together a whole load of plants that I want to put into this border. This is Euphorbia martinii. I've chosen it because it's a hybrid between two different euphorbias. One that really loves shade, a native plant actually, and a Mediterranean spurge. So it should really put up with both shade and full sun. It should be perfect in here. Now here's another native, but a strange one. It's a double buttercup. It's called Ranunculus acris flora plana. So flora plana just means it's got double flowers. And it's a road verge, hedgerow kind of a plant, so it should be completely at home here. And this too comes from a similar sort of place. It's a blue scabious, and the bees are going to love them. And although it's great to use indigenous plants because they're going to be better for our wildlife, butterflies and bees aren't fussy when it comes to nectar. This, for instance, this is a beautiful primula called Seboldii, and it's from Japan. And if you look in here, they've got these wonderful little stolons, these extra pieces all the way round, so it'll spread itself. And I'm going to put it down towards the end of the bed because it loves moisture. And this is just a white form of something which is native. It's a pulmonaria, a lungwort, and I think that pale colour in the shade in the evening is going to be just right. And this, look at this, it's this glorious Solomon seal. Isn't that so elegant, these great big arching stems? And these bells will gradually develop and hang down from there. And it will just sort of wander around. So perhaps back in here, where we can really appreciate its stature. Plenty of room for everything to spread out, but still a few spaces for me to find a few more plants. This bed used to be a path. We've dug out the rubble and added soil and leaf mould, but no manure. These plants just don't need it. I've finished planting the border, but as you can see, the rest of the garden's in bright sunlight, whereas this is now in dense shade. Look at that, not a bit of it anywhere. Well, I've watered everything thoroughly before I put it in, and I shall give it a really good soaking now, and it won't be long before everything starts to seed and run around and mix and mingle. And eventually I'll have the same sort of community that you'd find under any hedgerow.
That is the most beautiful tulip. I guess you wouldn't expect to find those growing in a Devonshire hedgerow, but I absolutely agree with Carol that if you want to see plants growing at their best, go to nature. That will always inform you much better than any textbook. And we'll be joining Carol later on in the programme, looking at propagation of plants that can be done right now at this time of year. Now, tulips are something that we've always loved in this garden. So in this area, which is the herb garden, we've got Indian velvet and some recreado and also negrita, which is a tall, paler one. And down here in the lime walk, I've flanked it with Nicholas Hayek. And I put the bulbs in the ground on January the 24th, which is much too late, but it's worked. So sometimes you can break the rules and get away with it. And certainly if you've got the bulbs, get them in the ground. Now these are very formal, and I like them for that. But if you look into the spring garden, you can see that the yellow tulips, West Point and yellow spring green, are coming up amongst all the yellow natural plants in a very loose way, and that works really well too. So you can have the formal and informal with the same plant working just as well. My tomatoes need to be watched regularly to get the timing of the potting on dead right. These are ones that I grew from seed a little while ago. This is San Marzano into plugs. And they're doing fine, but I think they're ready to move out, because what I've found over the years is that almost everything has a 10-day window when it either needs pricking out or potting on. And funnily enough, it never seems to recover if you miss that slot. It's an instinctive thing. If you look at this plant, it's getting a little yellow. If you compare it to this, which is in exactly the same compost, this is a better colour. It's a healthier green. This is a little yellow. Sometimes early tomatoes will turn a bluish purplish colour. Move them on, pot them on, and they'll recover. And of course these will be planted out into the top greenhouse in May, as soon as the nights get a little bit warmer. So the long and short of it is, time to take these and give them an individual pot. Now, potting on is a very simple process, made a lot easier by using good modules, because you don't have to lift them, and it's a nice deep one here, so the roots are well formed, the whole thing holds together as a unit. And by the way, once it's this size, don't try and hold it by a leaf, because it will just rip off. The stem is now strong enough to take my brutal touch. And I'm putting these into 3-inch pots. They've probably got some metric designation, but I don't know what it is. And the key thing with any potting on is not to go in too big a pot. And the reason for that is really because if you put too much potting compost around it, the roots won't reach it for ages, and so it just becomes a sump for water, and you get this sodden mass of soil that stays wet. And where the roots are will dry out, and it doesn't work at all as well. So it's worth taking the trouble to pot on every year, or in the case of a seedling like this, 2 or 3 times if need be, rather than try and skip a phase and go on to the next size up. So just put a little bit underneath the bottom and pop it in. It doesn't matter how deep it goes, just pop that in like that, give it a shake. And I don't firm these in too strongly, because when you water it, they'll firm in. And if these are due to go outside, don't even think about planting them outside before the end of May, beginning of June, because a cold night can undo all the goodness of a hot day. Now, there are various bits of Longmeadow I haven't shown you yet, but I'm about to show you one of the very best of all. And it's the compost heaps. Now, I love compost not just because it's so satisfying to turn what is waste material into the most precious item that a garden can have, which is this, which is finished compost. That's what drives this garden, but also because it exemplifies everything that a sustainable system is trying to do, which is to take all your waste, use what it has to give, and then make things better in a very gentle, subtle way. And that's what making compost does. Now, this system we have here with tin and lots of big bays is something that has evolved over the years and suits me here. But it's not the only way to do it. You can make compost in lots and lots of ways if you understand what you're trying to do. And anything that has ever lived will compost. Although having said that, fat, meat and cooked food is not a good idea to put on a compost heap because it attracts rats, and anyway it rots down very slowly. But for example, cardboard, absolutely fine. In fact, really good on a compost heap. And that will add a lot to our heap and also bulk it up because we want as much as possible. If you have foliage, this is comfrey that has been growing as a weed, and you've got other weeds in here, that's green and full of nitrogen. And really what you're trying to do is balance the nitrogen that you get in grass clippings and any green sappy plants, especially at this time of year, and the carbon you get in brown plant material, twigs that are shredded up, cardboard. This is cellulose-based packing material, very good. I've got some hay here, that's full of carbon. And in fact, the ideal ratio is about 20:1 carbon to nitrogen. And most compost heaps fail because they don't have enough carbon. If it gets at all sludgy, if it smells bad, a bit slimy, you need more carbon. You'll be amazed at how it will transform it. I've got kitchen waste here. Paper is very good, envelopes, chuck it all on. And then the next thing to do is to chop it up. Now, I use a machete for really big stuff, but actually I've found that if I spread it out, the easiest way to chop it all up into smaller bits is to mow it. Right, let's go. Right, now that is quite rough, but the idea is just simply to break it up a bit. And we add it to the heap in there, and you can see that the heap I'm adding it to, I'll take this off, is full of roughly chopped material. You know, some things have slipped through the net unchopped. There's bits of packaging in there, there's a stem that's been a bit broken up, but you can see that's given surface area for the bacteria to get to. And if I dig down into there, you should be able to see steam coming off it. Yeah, look, if I feel in there, it's warm. And that means that there are lots and lots of tiny creatures busily eating their way through this, and that's how compost is made. It's not the decomposition that makes compost, it's the digestion. Mainly by bacteria, but also fungi, nematodes, slugs, lots of worms, beetles. They all love it and digest it and use it. When I say lots, I mean really lots. 10 billion animals for every gram of compost. And as it heats up, more bacteria come into play. And it heats up even more, and more come through. And then when this starts to cool down, that means that it's time to reheat it. And the best way to do that is to turn it by adding oxygen. And it comes into this bin, which is pretty much usable as compost. It's a bit crude, a bit rough, and it's still being eaten, but that is becoming recognisably compost, but a bit sticky. It needs more time to be at its best. But when it's ready, it's like this here. And this is completely ready for the garden. And I'll tell you how I know, because compost that's ready to be used feels good, feels pleasant, smells just faintly of woodland floor. There's nothing nasty or unpleasant or dirty about it at all. And if it does feel a bit sticky, a bit yucky, turn it again. Keep turning it. And by turning it, you don't have to put it from one bay to the other. Just root it around. Get a fork and turn it up and down. Swizzle it with a stick. Anything, just to get air into it. Now, I'll tell you what, there we are. A toad. We often get toads in the compost heap. And what he's come in for, as much as anything else, are the slugs that will be in the heap. So you have this interconnectedness that's all over the garden. And I'm just part of that. So we'll put you back, old chap, where you won't get damaged. You go over there and have a sleep and a feed, and I will jump out. Of course, you don't need great big bins made out of corrugated iron to make good compost. You can do it on a small scale. You could use a dustbin, punch some holes in it, fill it up, and that will work perfectly well. You can have council sort of beehive compost bins. All you have to remember is the mix, carbon to nitrogen, with more carbon than nitrogen. Try and fill it up as quickly as possible, so store your materials for a bit if need be, and then turn it about every 3 to 5 weeks. The truth is that although the compost is essential here at Longmeadow, the soil is terrific, and that you can grow almost anything. But Rachel's been up to the Lake District to visit a garden where there's practically no soil at all, where it's rocky, it's battered by winds, and seemingly about the most inhospitable place that you could ever attempt to grow anything in. And yet, the result is beautiful.
The glacial valley of Great Langdale is one of the most romantic and awe-inspiring views in the Lake District. 18th century poets like Wordsworth and Coleridge came here inspired by the region's wild, untamed beauty that's battered by savage winds and high rainfall. This site would be a challenge for any garden, but here at Copt Howe, one man was inspired to overcome the punishing weather conditions and create his very own mountain paradise. "85-year-old Bob Hazeldine is a professor of chemistry and a veteran mountaineer. 3 decades ago, he and his late wife Peggy took the brave decision to turn this 2-acre site, which is strewn with immovable boulders at the foot of Langdale Pike, into a garden filled with rare plants from his expeditions around the world. You are blessed with the most incredible natural landscape. How do you go about creating a garden that works within this environment?
Well, to me, as a scientist, it's a question of observation. When we go up mountains, climbing mountains, we pass through, obviously lower down, areas where plants are growing. And if you're observant, you see little things growing, and you think, that's rather nice, I wonder what it is. So I have a little notebook and write it down and try and identify it later on when we get back. And then if we like it enough, see if we can get it over this side, or if not, we'll try and get a bit when we're next in that area and bring a bit back to grow, if it will grow.
So how did you go about protecting the garden from the elements?
Well, we learnt the hard way. We used to put plants in the ground, and then 2 weeks later, they're blown out of the ground. Sometimes we get 70-mile-an-hour gusts up the valley, and they would even shake the house then, if it trembled. And that's why these fences are around here as windbreaks. Without this mesh fencing around, which is only temporary, they've only been in 10 years, But that's to
Temporary
get these plants here to chance to grow.
Right.
And then later we'll take those out. Probably next year these will come down. But we get there slowly.
What about the actual rocks? Because obviously you can't move the largest boulders.
Well, the first thing to remember is that this garden is built on scree from a big cliff up behind us here. And therefore, wherever you dig, you find rocks. So we move out the rocks and use them to build a wall, make a raised bed. That's very good for the plants, because you get the drainage. And also, as you get older, we build the walls higher, so you can actually see the plants more easily. And also smell the perfume of them.
It's impossible not to notice lots of plants still in their pots and dotted around the garden. But Bob takes the long-term view when it comes to finding the perfect spot for each plant. And only when he feels it will thrive will he finally plant it. I get the sense that all this sort of instant gardening is absolutely of no interest whatsoever for you. It's not about creating a finished garden, it is the process of growing the plants.
That's right. It's copying nature, basically. That's what it boils down to at the end of the day, and being observant enough to notice what things are growing well and are handsome. I mean, the bamboos there, you see, we've propagated those just from a single stem with a little tiny bit of root at the bottom of it. And you can tell by the leaves it's happy.
Yeah.
It looks happy and healthy, like a smiling face, I call it. If the plant's smiling at you, you know it's all right.
What's so interesting is the way that you're using every single level. So you're going from these tiny alpines here in the raised bed.
Yes.
And then you go up through the mid-story with the shrubs and so on, right up into the tree canopy. So your eye just wants to travel all the way
Well, that's
up.
because when you're climbing a mountain, that's what you do. You're looking at the horizon high up there. But your eye is certainly looking at the close to where you're going to put your feet.
There's a trillium down there, which
Yes,
absolutely looks exquisite.
Well, we have lots of trilliums around, big ones and small ones, but I especially like these small ones. Rivali, it's called, this one.
This is gorgeous.
And we tried that in various places before we found that place. It likes that place. Put it here, it sulks.
Just a couple of feet away.
So it reminds me of ladies, actually.
Difficult.
It's not difficult, charming, but only in the right place.
Bob's Garden at Copt Howe is opening over the Easter weekend for the National Garden Scheme. It's a great day out, but if Cumbria's too far for you, there are plenty of other gardens around the country opening for charity this weekend. Highfields in Yorkshire, Yonder Hill in Devon, and the Old Corn Mill in Herefordshire are just a few. To check the opening times and for more suggestions, go to our website.
Still to come, how to sow carrots and avoid carrot root fly. A propagation masterclass that could save you a fortune. An extreme pruning, Eden style.
Now you can see that the peas I put in, 3-4 weeks ago are coming well. They haven't liked the dry weather, but they're perfectly healthy, as are the onions, the garlic and the shallots. The potatoes are coming through. These are the Red Duke of York, but the rocket that I sowed on top, which normally I'd expect to be a rash, was washed off by a heavy shower minutes after I sowed them, and it hasn't rained since. And so the best laid plans, whereas some that I put in between, just a week ago, have come up nicely, but there you go.
Each bed is planted with a different group of vegetables. And each year, this batch moves on to the neighbouring bed. This rotation of crops means that each group can share the same suitable soil preparation, and it also avoids the build-up of pests and disease specific to any one type of vegetable.
Now this bed is the brassica part of the rotation. I put some Cavolo Nero in there, and the final bed is for roots. Now that's essentially carrots, parsnips, and the members of the same family, so you've got celery, celeriac, and parsley, and I'll intersperse these with salad crops. But now I want to plant carrots and parsnips. And they like a soil that hasn't been freshly manured and doesn't have too many stones. Drainage is good. And the raised beds will help drainage. When it comes to sowing carrots, most people sow them in rows, but this is a technique which seems to work fairly well. I use 2 boards, which stops me treading on the soil. And I put one like that, and then flip it over. And I broadcast my carrot seed in the space between the boards. Now I've got quite a few different carrots here. I've got Autumn King, which is a good main stock carrot, and as its name implies, will sit throughout winter. Yellowstone. I've got one I want to plant today, which I bought in Italy, which is basically a Nant type, a Mezzolunga Nantese. And Nant carrots are good for early sowing. So mature fast, have a shorter root, very sweet, and so a good choice at this time of year. I like to do another sowing of carrots around about the end of May, early June, which is a good way of skipping the carrot fly cycle. But a very small seed, you see that, and this is a big packet of seed, this will do a lot. And I just take a sprinkle like that and just scatter them quite thinly. I don't worry if it's too even. Maybe just another little flourish at the end. And that's good. Now the point of broadcasting them is I won't thin them. I'll leave them like that and then pull them as I want to eat them. And it's thinning that attracts the carrot fly more than anything else. Because when you pull up a carrot, however small it is, you, the human, can smell that lovely carroty sweet smell. Well, if you can smell it, every carrot fly for about half a mile can smell it too. And they will come zipping over, lay their eggs on the soil, at the neck of the carrot, and then when the larvae hatch out, they will burrow into your roots. So we want to disturb them as little as possible. Now the system I've got is we have that like that, and all I'm going to do is flip that over on top, flip this over again, and then flip that again, and that again, and that's my next row. Although parsnips are closely related to carrots, they're better sown in rows than broadcast. This is because we want larger roots and spaced out about 2 or 3 inches apart. Try and sow them as thin as you can. The seeds are larger, so it's relatively easy to space them out. However, they are very slow to germinate, so it's a good idea to sow some radish along the same rill. These will grow and be harvested before they compete with the young parsnip seedlings. I've got some parsley seedlings that I sowed under cover into modules. And parsley is part of the same family as carrots and parsnips. Also, thinking of parsley and parsnips, a parsley root wants to be that big. It wants to be like a parsnip. And the top wants to be about 18 inches to 2 foot high. So it needs room. So if you plant it with generous spacing, and by generous, I reckon a good hand span, which in my case is about 9-10 inches, and the plants will grow strong and healthy, and you can have repeated pickings. Now, growing herbs or vegetables is about as earthy as you can get. But at the Eden Project down in Cornwall, they've been so successful that they've got a problem which needs a celestial solution.
In the 10 years since the Eden Project opened, the horticultural challenge has changed from getting the trees to grow to getting them to grow as they would in the wild.
Because of our special conditions that we have in this biome, our light levels aren't anything like the tropics. Plants have to take advantage of any light there is, so these trees push through really, really fast. So our trees sometimes tend to grow straight up instead of stretching out when they should do. So we're trying to simulate these different levels of canopy, and it's an interesting challenge.
But how do you prune when the branches you want to reach are over 150 feet above the ground and hemmed in by other trees?
Started off when the trees were small with long arm saws, and then as the trees grew we needed a cherry picker. Then we started abseiling from the roof, dangling off this steelwork here, which is a bit scary, but takes a long time to rig the ropes and transfer from one to the other. So the balloon is perfect. Helium-filled balloon. Originally it was used by canopy researchers out in places like French Guiana and Southeast Asia for scientists to access flowers and fruit and insects in the rainforest canopy. But we thought it would be a really simple solution for getting into the canopy for pruning jobs, for planting, checking the plants for health. It's a bit of a juggling act. There's all sorts of things to consider. Where the balloon is in relation to the biome structure and in relation to the trees around you. And sometimes it's hard to get to certain places because there's a tree canopy that's blocking your way. It's quite tricky to manoeuvre that balloon. I've tried various harebrained techniques to move it around the canopy over the years, but the grappling hook system was really useful. You can kind of make your way around like Spider-Man sort of thing. Sometimes it doesn't go to plan, but you know, it's not like I'm going to drift off into the stratosphere.
Helium is balanced by the weight of the gardener and a water tank, which can be filled or emptied, so that the balloon will almost hang in midair. It's a very elegant way to garden.
80% of all life in rainforest is up in the forest canopy. So now we want to start adding that second layer of planting. So we're just able to now add lots of the bromeliads and the epiphytes and orchids and tillandsias that live up in the rainforest canopy. And we can now do this with the balloon because it's such a delicate, nice tool to use. We can really get up and get some of that planting work done now.
What I love about it is the kind of architecture of the plants. You can really see the leaf forms and the structure of the palms in particular, which you just can't really see as well from the ground.
It's just fantastic views from up there. Also, I love being up there because you can't see any weeds and jobs that need doing. It just looks stunning and pristine.
It's a very important, serious piece of equipment. It just happens to be quite enjoyable as well.
The Eden Project would be a great family day out over the Easter holiday, but if you don't live in the southwest, Driffin Gardens in Glamorgan, the Annick Gardens in Northumberland, Trentham Gardens in Staffordshire and countless National Trust gardens all over the UK are putting on special events for both young and old this weekend. And you can find more information on our website. And if you're not planning to go out and about over Easter, there's plenty to be getting on with in your own garden. Now is the perfect moment to move any evergreen trees or shrubs. Dig the plant up with as much root as possible and then transfer them to their planting hole, filling it with water before you backfill with soil. Make sure it doesn't dry out, and you'll find that it will grow again very quickly at this time of year. Also, now is a good time to be sowing biennials such as these wallflowers for colour next spring. Scatter the seed thinly in a seed tray, ready to be pricked out later on. It's a fairly slow process growing biennials, but well worth the wait, because it will give you masses of colour next spring when the garden and you need it most.
Most of the work in this garden for the last month or so has been based around planting, dividing, moving plants, particularly here in the jewel garden, because we've completely given it a revamp, or in the process of replanting it over the coming year. And now is the perfect time to get herbaceous perennials in, and they're growing fast. So there's a sense of the clock ticking. The jewel garden is obviously based on a colour scheme dictated by the colours of jewels. So you've got diamonds and emeralds and rubies and sapphires and amethysts. Those are the basic 5 colours. And the best form of pure colour is through herbaceous perennials. I'm just putting these out because when you come home with a car full of plants, the instinct to get them in the ground. It's exciting, and it feels like the process is being held back if you don't get on with that. But actually I'd urge you to place them in their pots and have a look, walk around. Certainly leave them overnight, come back in the morning. Unless you've got a plan exactly placing every plant, and we've never had in this garden anything like that. It's all about instinct and feel, and you'll know or have a good feel for when a plant's in the right place. So I'm going to leave those, but I'll get them in the ground by the end of the weekend, certainly by Monday night. But I can start planting right away these iris. This is iris deep black. Not grown it before, but I want it for its sort of pure, rich purple. It is almost black. And it's taking that purple as far as it will go. And that intensity is exactly right for the dual garden. And it is important with all iris to give them as much sun as you can have. Where did I put my spade? Now, what we've learned over the years is that the effect of neighbouring plants can be as damaging in terms of shade as a wall or an overhanging tree. And that's why I'm putting these iris on the edge of a path. That's south over there. There's nothing directly blocking them because iris needs to bake. I'm just breaking that up. See, fundamentally this is heavy soil, so I'm going to lighten it. I've got some grit here. So now if I take this, you can see how that you have the rhizome on the surface. Take it out of the pot. You have a really quite decent root system beneath. And it is absolutely essential that you keep this above the soil level. Don't bury it, because that wants to bake. And the more it can bake, the better the flowers will be the following year. So if we plant that about that sort of depth, so you can see that this is on the surface, the feeding roots are down below, getting all the nutrients, and the plant will be healthy. Now these plants have been bought, but it's much cheaper and actually just as exciting to generate your own plant material from stock you've already got, whether it be from cuttings or seed or division. And when it comes to propagating plants, there's absolutely nobody who does it better or knows more about it than Carol.
Just look at this beautiful plant. It's one of the most exquisite things in the garden at this time of year. It's Lamium morvala. And when I see it at this time of year, I think, right, I'm going to propagate it, I'm going to make more, and then I forget about it. And it's the perfect time for so much propagation. You know, you can sort of feel everything growing. I suppose most of my garden has been propagated from seed, cuttings, division, and quite a bit of it from basal cuttings, and that's just how I'm going to make more of this. And all I'm doing is slipping my knife right down at the base of the stem where it joins onto the rootstock and just detaching pieces like that. You're looking for shoots that are unflowered if possible and where the stems are still solid. Now is the perfect time to take cuttings from a huge range of plants to take advantage of their rapid spring growth. For more information about which plants you can propagate right now, visit our website. Take my coat off, then I can really get down to work. Now the clay pot, and I'm going to fill it with this very, very gritty compost. It's important when you're doing any sort of cutting really to have well-drained compost, and fill it right up to the top, and then I'm going to bring it over here. I'll just give it a smart tap down to settle it, and then each of these cuttings, they're rather long but they're very strong. No point at all attempting these sort of cuttings when the stem is actually hollow. So you've got to do it at this time of year when everything's really, really solid. Now I've cut that so cleanly across there, I don't even need to take a bit more off there. But what I'll probably do is take a couple of those leaves off, because the cutting no longer has the roots of the plant to draw up moisture, and it will keep on transpiring through these leaves. So if you remove a few, it just means there's much less stress on it while it's concentrating on making roots. And I'm pushing it right down in the side of the pot so it's nice and firm and tucked in like that. Famous grit. This will keep any weeds down, retain moisture in here, and also stop them rotting around the top. So one good watering outside and then into its final place. I've got lots of half-hardy annuals in here, and they're ready now to be pricked out. And they don't wait for you. They just got such energy, they want to get on with it. And if you miss the time, then they turn into pathetic little plants. So you've really got to keep them on the move. Now this Cosmos Purity is really ready. And it's so important with half-hardy annuals to make sure that you keep them moving. As soon as you see those first true leaves, you've got to get in there and separate them. And vitally important to pick them up by the seed leaves. And they are dispensable, so if they get damaged, the plant will still get over it. But if you start bending stalks and bashing true leaves and damaging roots, then it won't. It's strange to think that this tiny little plant is going to turn itself into a 3 foot or a metre giant later on. Last year I decided there was too much of this Hemeroculus in this bed, so I lifted up a couple of clumps, meaning to give them a new position. Well, I put them into pots temporarily and topped them up with a bit of compost, and that's exactly where they've stayed. I'm lucky really, they've been very forgiving despite my neglect. When you get to this stage, you've got two options really. You can either separate them into big clumps and replant them into the garden, or you can pull them apart and make this nice rending sound when I do it. And these can go into pots and just stay there, growing an entirely new root system that'll fill this pot up and make a really vigorous load of plants. And then later on, I can choose the position I want to plant them in. This is Stafford. It's a lovely dark red daylily, and I think it might be quite a good idea to have a few more back in the hotbed. Well, look at that. That's 7 really good plants out of that clump. They look a bit dishevelled at the moment, and I could trim these leaves back just as I did with the Lamium to reduce the stress, but I think they're going to perk up. Good watering and they'll be as right as rain.
There's absolutely no question that generating your own plants gives more satisfaction than anything else in gardening. However, most people do buy plants at some stage or other, and if you're shopping for plants this weekend, make sure they're good quality. If you take a plant like this, you can see without any horticultural experience that it's healthy. The leaves are green and glossy. It's got a good bushy spread and substance. It's nice and squat. It's not too tall and floppy. And you should look at the roots. Don't be shy about this. Carefully put your hand on top of the compost, but not crushing the plant. Tip it over and take it out the pot. And you can see that it's got a nice root system. It's beginning to curl around the top, but that is by no means pot bound. Healthy plant, healthy top, healthy roots. Carefully put it back in, and then you haven't damaged it in any way. If you've inspected your goods, you can pay for it with confidence that it's going to do what it says it's going to do. Now, another purple, which is about as different in every way from the iris as can be imagined, is one of my favourite clematis. Viticella purpurea plena elegans. Now, it's a mouthful, but it's a very simple plant to grow because once you get it right, it just performs every year. And like all clematis, it does like rich soil and plenty of moisture. So it wants to have a substantial hole because I want to put in plenty of compost. Normally I say don't add compost in great quantities to a planting hole because you want the roots to get out into the soil. But clematis always do better if they can get at plenty of moisture. And what the compost is going to be doing is not feeding the clematis so much as holding the moisture. So I'm digging a pit really, about a couple of feet deep, which I'm going to fill up with a coarse compost. Okay, there we go. And I've brought with me compost that is not finely rotted. This is from the Middle Bay, and I've added in a little bit of old hay. Straw would do, even cardboard. It doesn't look very appetizing, but the clematis will love it. Now, if I take that out of the pot, see the characteristic yellow roots of clematis. So I'll just take that up, being careful with it. Now this has just got a couple of stems. As it gets older and older, it will become multi-stemmed and can have as many as half a dozen or more growing out from the base. Pop that in the hole, nice and deep. I always plant clematis so that it's 2 inches deeper than the pot, and then just backfill it gently. Before I firm it in too hard, and I give that a good soak. Now, quite a few of these plants and others from the Jewel Garden will be available at a bring and buy stall at Gardeners World Live, which is from June the 15th to June the 19th. And all the proceeds of those plant sales will go to children in need. So another good reason, as if you needed one, to come and enjoy the show. Now, I'm going to put up a really good support for it because by late summer, certainly after a year or two, that will be 10 foot tall and a great column of this wonderful maroony purple flower. Right, that's done. And that's all we've got time for. But we will be back here at Longmeadow in 2 weeks' time. We're taking a break for a week. And when we return in a fortnight, it'll be at our normal time at 8:30. So I'll see you back here then, and have a really good Easter weekend. Bye-bye.
We've got more from Monty next on BBC Two. He visits Renaissance gardens conceived as works of art in Florence. That's followed by lots of opinionated types. Frank Skinner's joined by Chris Addison and Andy Osho in Norwich.